Hi, my name is Jeff Horstman. I'm the Executive Director at ShoreRivers. I'm here today at the scenically beautiful and socially distant Wye River to introduce our 2019 River Report Card. ShoreRivers has a vision of healthy waterways across Maryland's eastern shore, and our report card is one way that we gauge the progress. The good news is that water quality got a little bit better last year, and the bad news is that I have to deliver this virtually as we wait out the effects of this virus. Please sit back and enjoy our River Report Card, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. And hello, everyone. I'm Matt, and I'm your Chop Tank Riverkeeper. ShoreRivers has a water quality monitoring program where we collect thousands of data points at nearly 200 locations throughout our region every year. This data is essential for ShoreRivers' mission of protecting and restoring our waterways, and it's also the same data that we put into our water quality report card every year. So for this presentation, you're going to hear from your Miles-Wye Riverkeeper, Ellie Bassett, your Chester Riverkeeper, Tim Trumbauer, and your Sassafras Riverkeeper, Zach Kelleher, as well as myself from the Great Chop Tank River on the 2019 annual report. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for having an interest in the conditions of our waterways on the Eastern Shore. To lay the foundation for the presentation, I want to share a quick overview of our monitoring program and how we grade the conditions of our rivers. We collect and analyze water quality data according to the Mid-Atlantic Tributary Assessment Coalition protocols, and we use their guidance to grade the varying parameters. On each river report, you'll find this symbol. On the right-hand side is the 5 icons representing the water quality parameters that factor into the score. In the report, each of the icons will be colored based on the conditions of the data. Green meaning it scored well and had favorable conditions, and yellow to red showing poor conditions. The score of these 5 parameters is then factored into the overall grade for the river, shown as a large letter grade, which will also be color-coded accordingly. Under the letter grade, you'll also notice the 2-year trend, and if the score got better or worse compared to the prior year, which in this case is 2018. Now let's look at this for the 2019 ShoreRivers benchmark grade. For all of the water quality data collected within the region of the Chop Tank, Miles-Wye, Eastern Bay, Chester, and Sassafras rivers, the overall average water quality score is a B- for 2019, showing an improvement from 2018. Looking at the parameters, you'll see dissolved oxygen scored very well with an A, total nitrogen scored well with a B, total phosphorus scored worse with a C, chlorophyll A, an indicator of algae, scored a B, and water clarity scored a C. You'll see this general trend of grades across our rivers, but as we all know, each of our rivers is unique with its own story to tell. And that's why I'm excited for you to dive into each river with our river keepers and hear the water quality story from 2019. When we look at 2019 in review, it's hard to overlook how the climate crisis is impacting our rivers. The climate crisis is a real threat and will bring more pollution to our rivers on the Eastern Shore. Increased precipitation transporting more polluted runoff, sea level rise encroaching on farmland will cause more issues with saltwater intrusion and accelerated rates of erosion, and a longer and warmer growing season creating earlier and more frequent algae blooms are all major threats that we need to be prepared for. Climate change waits for no one, which is why the theme for the ShoreRivers 2019 Water Quality Report Card is Climate Resiliency. You're going to hear from each of our river keepers how the climate crisis is visibly impacting their waterways and how we can work to make our rivers more resilient to these changes. So let's get started with the river reports, where I will kick off with the Chop Tank River Report. The overall water quality grade for the entire Chop Tank River system in 2019 was a B-, which was consistent with the overall grade in 2018. Let's take a look at the Upper Chop Tank. The Upper Chop Tank River experienced an improvement in overall water quality and also graded a B-. The water quality score represents good dissolved oxygen levels and an improvement of 14% for dissolved oxygen, and also an improvement of 18% for total phosphorus. Total nitrogen loads showed an improvement in the Upper Chop Tank River as well, but overall, nutrients and poor water clarity are holding down the overall score for the Upper Chop Tank River. Moving downriver in the Lower Chop Tank River, we saw the worst conditions of water clarity than anywhere else in the river system, and we also saw worsening conditions of chlorophyll A and the amount of algae blooms that occurred in the Lower Chop Tank. Total phosphorus levels remained stable, although still graded at a C. But on the positive note, nitrogen and dissolved oxygen in the lower river showed improvements. Overall score for the lower Choptank River was also a B-. Now let's take a look at the Tuckahoe River. Remind you, the Tuckahoe is usually the tributary in the system with the worst water quality, but in 2019 it showed great signs of improving water quality. Dissolved oxygen increased 27% in the river, which is great for creating better habitat and conditions for fish. Total phosphorus scores improved 15%, although still remains low. And nitrogen scores did increase in the Tuckahoe as well, but the overall score is still very poor with a D. Now the big story for the Choptank River in 2019 was the low salinity levels. We don't grade salinity in the overall score, but we do collect salinity data when we're out doing our monitoring. To put it into perspective, the average salinity reading in 2019 for the lower Choptank River was 10 parts per thousand. Normally it's 15 parts per thousand or greater. And when we have low salinity levels, that impacts our oyster farmers, our oysters, and all the fish and species that depend on having salty water in the river. As you may recall, in 2019, we had to cancel our MGO, our Marylanders Grow Oysters program, because of the low salinity levels. Horn Point Hatchery, which is located on the Choptank River, did not have salty enough water to pull from the river to create the spat-on shell that they need to meet the demand for the Marylanders Grow Oysters program. We hope conditions have changed enough for this year, and we hope for 2020 to get the program back up and underway and to get oysters out to your docks if you're participating in the program. Taking a look at the major subwatersheds in the Choptank, you'll see that the overall water quality score for the subwatersheds ranged between a C+ and a B. Algae was an issue in 2019, as well as water clarity. In terms of chlorophyll A, the Tredaven River, Latrap, and Island Creek all scored below 50%. In terms of water clarity, Harris Creek scored an overall 31%, Latrap and Island Creek scored 33%, Broad Creek scored 36%, and the Tredaven River scored 45%, all contributing to the D+ that the water clarity score was given for the lower Choptank River. Now that we understand the current water quality conditions for the Choptank, I want to take a moment and mention how climate change is and will continue to impact the Choptank River's water quality. Changes in total precipitation shows increasing amounts of rainfall over the region, and the predicted warmer weather means longer growing seasons. Remind you that the Choptank River's watershed is predominantly agricultural at over 60% of the land use, and the dominant pollutants are nutrient and sediments that come from non-point source runoff. So, a longer growing season and more rainfall in a region like the Eastern Shore creates a situation where more nutrient runoff is possible. It is expected that the Choptank River will see a 22% increase in nitrogen pollution washing into the system over the rest of the century. This tells me that our opportunity to raise the bar on nutrient management efforts and implement water quality protection projects is now. Capturing runoff from our farm fields and urban areas at every chance possible is even more important given these scientific predictions. And while it may seem like an uphill battle, there's resources available to help. Through the Envision the Choptank partnership, ShoreRivers is offering an agricultural best management practice incentive program that aims to work with landowners and farmers to accelerate the rate of new water quality projects on our land. Contact me to get involved, and let's work together to make a resilient Choptank River. Thank you for tuning in for the Choptank Report. Now I'm going to turn it over to our Miles-Wye Riverkeeper, Ellie Bassett.
Hey everyone, I'm Ellie Bassett, your Miles-Wye Riverkeeper, joining you virtually from Leeds Creek, a tributary off the Miles River. 2019 was another really interesting year for water quality in Eastern Bay, the Wye River, and particularly the Miles River. Unfortunately, we saw an overall decline in water quality, so let's jump in and take a closer look at why that might be and what we can do to improve it. Okay, so here's a closer look at the grades for this watershed. As I mentioned, our overall grade declined slightly to a C+, and the main culprit for that decline was in the Miles River. But first, let's take a closer look at Eastern Bay and the Wye River, which both received similar grades and water quality data to the previous year. Eastern Bay notoriously scores well, and generally has great water quality, the main reason being because it is so open and there is not as much land draining to that watershed. Specifically, Shipping Creek and Prospect Bay scored the best in this watershed, while Crab Alley and Cox Creek saw lower scores in clarity. Looking over at the Wye River complex, which comprises of the Wye main stem, the Wye Narrows, and the Wye East, this complex continues to have the poorest water quality conditions in the watershed. The Wye Narrows in particular had poor clarity and high amounts of algae this past year, while the Wye East had the highest amounts of nutrient pollution. This is an indicator that what we are doing on our lands is impacting our water quality. Restoration programs can help improve these scores, which I will talk about more in a minute. Finally, let's take a closer look at the Miles River, which saw a decline in water quality. The reason we saw such a decline in the Miles is similar to what we see happening in the Wye River. These maps show different scores and hotspots for some of the parameters that we measure. You can see in the headwaters of the Miles, including Goldsboro Creek and Glebe Creek, that they are polluted with excess nutrients, especially phosphorus. Leeds Creek also had the lowest amount of oxygen in the river, which also brought the overall grade down. On a positive side, we did actually see an overall improvement in water clarity in the Miles River, which could be because we had less rain and stormwater runoff entering the river this past year. Seeing this decline in the Miles means that we have some work to do, and this watershed will be a priority for restoration moving forward in the coming few years. Here's a closer look at all of the tributaries in this watershed. Again, notice that most of the tributaries in the Eastern Bay scored fairly well, while all of the tributaries in the Wye and Miles saw poorer water quality conditions. As I said earlier, we know that this pollution is coming from our own land practices, which gives us an opportunity to improve these scores. Homeowners can implement stewardship practices such as river-friendly yards to make a direct impact. Our Sassafras Riverkeeper will give us more info about this program in his section. The Wye East was previously identified as a priority for restoration in this region as well, as it consistently sees poor water quality conditions in the headwaters, located in Wye Mills. This community is currently experiencing increased storm events due to climate change, which results in extreme flooding from both tidal influence from the river and a lack of stormwater control. This is threatening the community, especially the historic Wye grist mill, and it's contributing to more pollution entering this degraded river through stormwater runoff. To combat both of these issues, ShoreRivers is working to make Wye Mills a climate-resilient community by identifying and implementing projects that will control stormwater. We are striving to implement more projects like this that promote co-benefits, such as water quality improvements and community resiliency. We are currently in the planning phases of this project, so stay tuned for more info. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and watching, and I will now pass the hat to Tim Trumbauer, our Chester Riverkeeper.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Trumbauer, your Chester Riverkeeper. Thanks so much for tuning in. So before we dig into the details, I want to remind everyone of a few key points about our Chester River. Number one, the Chester River is polluted, primarily with nutrient and sediment pollution. Number two, most of the pollution in the Chester River comes from local sources within our own watershed. And number three, the good news is that restoration is working. Water quality is slowly but steadily improving in the Chester River. And as I sit here on Rosin Creek with kingfishers fluttering behind me, I hope you will agree that protecting and restoring our waterways is incredibly important work. So let's take a look at the details.
Okay, this is the Chester River page directly from the report card. And hey, that's a lot of green, which is a good thing. Remember that we use Bay Health Index standards. So in general, when you see green, it's good, yellow is so-so, and orange or red is bad. For the first time in 5 years, the grade improved from a C+ to a B-. Water quality was consistently pretty good throughout the watershed. So let's take a detailed look at a few of the different parameters. Let's start with dissolved oxygen, which was healthy in most areas, though we did see a small dead zone in the deeper areas of the channel in 2019. This is represented here on the map with the orange and yellow. Dead zones are usually caused by warm water and excess nutrient pollution. They are unfortunately common here, but we believe the 2019 dead zone was enhanced due to large flows of nutrient-rich water into the bay from spring rains. Speaking of nutrient pollution, let's take a look at that next. Overall, we measured less nutrient pollution in the Chester than in previous years. Improvements are credited to drier weather, particularly in the summer and fall, and of course to the tremendous restoration efforts of ShoreRivers, other organizations, and our government to reduce pollution. These maps here show total nitrogen on the left and total phosphorus on the right. As you can see, nutrient pollution does increase as you travel upriver, which is one of the reasons we always emphasize that pollution in the Chester River comes from local sources. And here is a reminder about why we care so much about nutrient pollution. Not only does nutrient pollution cause dead zones, but also these terrible algal blooms. And this is my house, my dog, my creek, and unfortunately, my algal bloom. So let's look at algae a little more. While we do have some hot spots, such as in Rosin Creek here, Southeast Creek here, and the Corsica River here, overall, algae levels were lower this year than in the previous year, which is a good thing. Next up, human health and bacteria. Most areas in Chester met water quality standards for enterococci bacteria, which is a good sign. We did record occasionally high readings in Crumpton, Chestertown, Ross Wharf, and Langford Bay, but these were usually associated with heavy rain events, and we always recommend not swimming for a few days after heavy rains. Of course, there are inherent risks in open water swimming, and we recommend that you follow our best swimming practices and check the latest bacteria results on our website at www.shorerivers.org/swim. Next up is submerged aquatic vegetation, also known as SAV or bay grasses. Really nothing but good news here. SAV has been increasing for the past 5 years in all areas of the Chester. This is a sign of improving water quality and encouraging news about the resiliency of the Chester River. Here I am with your Miles-Wye Riverkeeper and some volunteers harvesting seeds near Ken Island with the Department of Natural Resources. And here's a bed of wild celery in the Upper Chester that grew from our seeding efforts. The last thing I will address today is climate resiliency. Increased frequency and intensity of rainstorms and sea level rise are threatening our property and infrastructure through flooding and erosion. ShoreRivers can help you make your property more climate resilient through our River Friendly Yards program, which Zach will cover in a minute, and we're working on legislation at the state level to make sure that public infrastructure, commercial development, and home improvement projects all account for climate impacts during planning and construction phases. Another way to improve climate resiliency is by upgrading stormwater runoff infrastructure. In partnership with Washington College and the town of Chestertown, and with funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we are developing a comprehensive stormwater management plan for the town of Chestertown. The plan to be completed this year will identify a prioritized list of potential stormwater treatment facilities and strategies. We're excited about this project and will keep everyone updated via our newsletters and social media. And last but not least, thank you to our Chester Tester volunteers and to all of the volunteers who help with water quality monitoring or our other programs this year. Your support makes this work possible. Take it away, Zach.
Hey everyone, this is Zach Kelleher, your Sassafras Riverkeeper. I'm here today on Turner's Creek to talk a little bit about 2019 on the Sassafras. Now this was an interesting year for us. We saw lots of positive signs of resiliency and proof that the restoration and outreach efforts that we're working on are having a positive impact on local water quality. Unfortunately though, we also saw increased impacts from climate change and identified problem areas that we still need to continue to work on. The good news though is that there are actions that every single one of us can take starting today that will have a positive impact and improve the health and well-being of this beautiful river. So let's take a look at the data and see what we can all do to protect and restore the Sassafras River. So the good news is that this year the Sassafras received an overall grade of a B-, which is what we received in 2018 as well. This year really highlighted how resilient our natural systems can be, especially when they're given a chance to recover. The first half of 2019 saw continued high levels of rainfall and the ongoing impacts from the previous year. When things finally dried out in late summer, the amount of runoff and pollution flowing into the river decreased substantially, and the river got a chance to breathe. Several parameters returned to historic averages that we haven't seen here in 3 years or more. Salinity and clarity both rebounded rapidly, and conditions in the fall were the best we saw all year. As you can see though, the upper Sassafras continues to struggle. Water quality does improve as we move further and further downriver, which reinforces the fact that the majority of pollution entering the Sassafras is coming from within our own watershed. Unfortunately, this late season return to normal wasn't enough to offset all of the nutrient pollution we saw throughout most of the year. Nutrients and sediment continue to be the biggest source of pollution entering the Sassafras. Nitrogen levels in particular increased substantially throughout the entire river. We did see a spike in nitrogen at the mouth of the river, which does show the increased impacts we're seeing from what's flowing down the Susquehanna River from Pennsylvania and New York. Phosphorus levels did also increase as well, especially in the upper Sassafras, but not nearly as substantially as nitrogen levels increased. These excess nutrients from farm fields, septic tanks, and lawns run off into the river every time it rains and help fuel algal blooms. Chlorophyll A is used to indicate the presence of algae, and you can see that these excess nutrients caused high levels of chlorophyll throughout the majority of the river last year. As rain events continue to increase in intensity and frequency, these threats will only worsen. More rainfall will mean that the floodgates at Conowingo will continue to be opened more, which means that more trash, debris, nutrients, sediment, and other pollutants will flow down into the mouth of the Sassafras and then continue down throughout the bay, causing devastating harm. This is why we continue to do whatever we can to make sure that Pennsylvania and New York are held accountable and get the help that they need to reduce upstream pollution before it enters the bay. This increased rainfall will also lead to more runoff from our lawns, towns, and farm fields unless we start making changes now. We're continuing to work with local farmers in the watershed to implement best management practices that are preventing tons of nutrients from entering the river each year. If we continue to let green grass lawns look like this, then we will continue to see water that looks like this. Since the majority of pollution is coming from within our watershed, we need to change our individual behaviors and practices here. One of the best things that you can do to help us build this local resiliency is to get involved with our River Friendly Yards program. This program is designed for every community member, and it offers a suite of practices and actions that you can start taking today. This includes anything from just installing a rain barrel to planting a native plant, or even building a rain garden or something more complex. The three main tenets of this program are to reduce turf grass, stop applying fertilizers, and plant more native plants. Native plants offer incredible benefits to local water quality and ecosystems. They tend to have much denser and deeper root systems than non-native ornamental plants, which means that they can absorb more rain, filter out more nutrients, and help combat erosion. They also provide crucial habitat for insects, birds, and bees, and more that cannot be found in turf grass or most of the ornamental plants found in most developed yards. If you want to find out more about this great program, check out this link on our website, where we've put together a bunch of resources and plant lists and everything else you need to get started and make your yard more river friendly. This program is a personal passion of mine, and it offers one of the best ways for us to reduce the amount of nutrients flowing off the land, which will benefit local water quality and also help to improve habitat for our critical pollinators. If we can all commit to taking just one of these actions today, the collective good that will do for the Sassafras and our other waterways here on the Eastern Shore will be astounding. So with that being said, I just want to thank you for tuning in and watching this presentation about the state of the Sassafras and our other rivers, and I hope to see you soon on the river. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Pluta for some closing remarks.
Hey everyone, this is Matt, your Chop Tank Riverkeeper again, and I want to thank you all for tuning in and sharing an interest in the water quality conditions of our rivers. Climate change is most certainly going to add pollution to our waterways, but working together we can strengthen our rivers' resiliency to those changes. I'd like to give a major thank you to our report card and State of the River sponsors, the Easton Group at Morgan Stanley, Lamont, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and a major thank you to all of Shore River's citizen scientist volunteers for your time and dedication to this program. Midshore Creek Watchers, Chester Testers, and Sassafras Samplers, without your help, we would not have the data that goes into developing this report card. Don't forget to read through your copy of the 2019 Shore Rivers Annual Report Card, which can be downloaded from our website at shorerivers.org. We will also be sending out a membership-wide email with a copy of this presentation, as well as a link to a survey that we would greatly appreciate you taking time to complete and provide feedback. And finally, as one last takeaway, I'd like to encourage you to follow your Riverkeepers on social media and subscribe to their monthly newsletter on our website to stay informed on projects, volunteer opportunities, and more resources related to what you heard today. Take the tips that we gave you today and turn them into action, whether it be on your own property, in your neighborhoods, or in your communities. Let's do this together. So thank you all, and we look forward to working with you to clean our rivers.